and welcome to Beyond the Classroom, a podcast by DS Academy where we explore real questions, real challenges, and have meaningful conversations about learning differences, education, parenting, and inclusion. So today is our very first episode. My name is Hamada. I'm a DS lecturer, DS Academy lecturer, and I will be taking you through motivation. We're going to look at what does that look like in a child? What is the reason why learners or children are motivated? And what are some of the things that we can do to support motivation in these learners? Joining me today, I'm very excited to share with you. We have 3 guest speakers. So to my left here, we have Pearllyn. She is registered psychologist and deputy director of SpLD assessment services at the Dyslexia Association of Singapore. And then over here, we have Dr. June Siew. She is head of DS Academy, as well as a mother of 2 teenagers and 1 primary schooler. And then to my left over here, right at the corner, we have Jolene here. She is a DS Academy lecturer. She was previously an educator as well as an educational therapist. She's also a mom of 2 children, 1 preschooler and 1 primary schooler. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so topic of motivation. Maybe you can share with me what exactly does motivation look like in a child or a student?
Yes. So motivation is the drive behind doing something, and it can look quite different in different settings and with different children. Yeah. So if you're an educator, you may find this familiar. So you may have a child who is unwilling to do a task that you may think, oh, it's well within your capability. Why aren't you doing it? Yeah. But if you're a parent, maybe at home, your child is not willing to complete a homework or to complete a chore. And so it really depends. The reasons behind the lack of motivation can differ quite a bit.
You do psychological assessments. So you meet parents, a lot of parents, you meet a lot of children, right?
Yes,
I think I'm interested to know what would that look like in an assessment? You know, I mean, it's very daunting, right? It's like 3 hours, right?
Yes, and it's the first time the child actually comes to the assessment center.
Yeah.
Some of them may appear quite shy, maybe quite worried. So it's really the role of the psychologist to have the child warm up and settle into the assessment setting so that we can get the full range of the child's abilities. So in different settings, when working with a child with different learning needs, the psychologist needs to get the child to warm up. So recently, I actually had a case where the child came in and was very friendly. She's a primary 3 girl.
Okay.
She came in and she was very excited to share about what she likes. And she was happy to talk about her school, her friends. But when the assessment kicked in, you know, when we had to get her to do some reading, some writing, you can see such a big shift in her behavior.
Right.
Because she started turning away. She started asking unrelated questions about, the classroom. Why is there a clipboard? Why are you holding a timer? And she's just started asking different questions that you could see it was quite different from how she presented at the start. But so to get her to be motivated to complete a task, I gave her some rewards, gave her some stickers, set of tasks for her. And so as she checked off each task, she would get the reward. So using this external kind of motivator, she was able to complete the task. But again, this is just one child out of many. We have children who come in and they were very willing to just complete a task.
Right.
Yeah. So it really depends on the child.
You know, as you're telling that, it reminds me of, I'm sure every educator or parent, right, has a flashback. Maybe you have all these like scenarios in your mind of there's always that one student in the class who will present this sort of task avoidance, what we'll call it, right, as educators. Suddenly the whole classroom is interesting, right? You know, so the blinds are interesting. Suddenly there are holes in the wall that they want to color, right? You become interesting, your outfit's interesting, right? Yeah, so, but that's in the classroom, right? What does it look like at home?
Okay, I think children who are not motivated can seem like they are lazy or unwilling.
Yes.
Right? And in terms of like general behavior at home, they may perpetually look tired. They may be irritable when you actually remind them of their responsibilities. So they might even appear as though as they're not interested in anything. Just scrolling on their phone, perhaps. Yeah. That's the general behavior that you might get at home. For specific task completion, I think not different from what Pearllyn has shared earlier. The child might take a long time to start his work. And even when he has started or he or she has started, they will give up easily. And also, I think they require a lot of hand holding to complete the task. Yeah, so numerous reminders from parents. And I think for busy parents and educators, this kind of behavior can be quite frustrating.
Yeah.
It's like we might think, why can't you just get your act together? What's so hard about it?
Yeah.
It just takes 15 minutes. Come on.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I think parents can resort to nagging, to, for example, using rewards or even using bribery.
Yeah.
Like, hey, okay, do your homework and then I'll give you screen time.
Yes, that's a common one, right? I think these days, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, as a parent, I'm guilty of that as well.
Okay, that's interesting that you mentioned rewards, right? Because in this context, rewards almost sounds like you're just getting them to comply. But we're talking about motivation. Like, where does that fit in?
I think that's really an important point here, because I think we all agree that motivation is not compliance. Yeah. But for busy professionals and parents, sometimes we have to resort to rewards. Like the psychologist, she has to get her test done. She has to give the reward, correct, right? Yeah. So it's not bad in that sense. It gets the task done. But I think an over-reliance on it, we will have to be more careful, because I think it's about the message that we're sending to the child.
Yeah.
We might convey, unknowingly the message that work is a chore. Like learning is an obstacle before pleasure.
Yeah. Or like work is just a to-do list, right? And that's when you have parents saying things like, they're not putting in effort. They just want to finish the task for the sake of finishing the task.
Totally.
Yeah. This idea of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, right? We'll look at that later, because I think we can digress quite a bit if you talk about that. Okay. So let's come back to, you've already shared with us what that picture of an unmotivated learner, whether child or student, looks like, right? What is the cause of this lack of motivation? Parents could say things like, I've tried rewards, or the rewards don't last, or it doesn't, I tried it on one day and the next day they don't want it. So it's just, he's not motivated to do anything. And that's something that a lot of parents share with us in our lectures as well, our participants, right? A lot of the case studies that they share, it has to do with, they don't want to do it. I am there. I have told them they don't want to do it. We go to schools, right? And Jolene, this is something that you could share, you have heard as well. They say, my students are not motivated. I had a teacher come up to me during one of the trainings, and they said, first, I initially thought he was talking about his own student. And later on, he revealed that he was talking about his own child, right? That he isn't able to motivate his child. Then he was wondering, what is it? Is it an unwillingness to learn? He himself, as an educator, is wondering, what is the cause of this lack of motivation?
Okay, so I think when we are thinking about a child's lack of motivation, the first thing that's very important for us is not to label the child as part of his or her personality, being lazy, having poor attitude. Because many a times, very often, this lack of motivation is due to a past experience or something about the environment. So for children who have experienced repeated failures, right, in school, for example, they've gone through so many failures that they ask themselves, what's the point of trying? I'm just so bad at it. So what's the point? Right. So for them, this repeated failure leaves somewhat like a scar for them. Yeah. The other thing is also, it's not only children who have learning difficulties who go through these repeated failures. Even children who have unidentified learning difficulties, right? If they have not been using the right strategies that help them to learn effectively, then this learned helplessness, it's what also makes them demoralized, right? Unmotivated in the longer term as well, right? So they start asking themselves similarly, what's the point, right? When it doesn't work. So for these children, these setbacks could actually result in them taking on this mental script of, let me not try because I don't want to have that further disappointment. It's their way of protecting themselves. Yeah. Other ways or other reasons why children may be unmotivated was perhaps due to past experiences with adults. perhaps in school, right? Being embarrassed in front of the entire class, right? Or being called out, being corrected in a very harsh manner frequently.
Yeah.
It makes learning feel unsafe for them, right? Even for parents, like June mentioned, right? Constant nagging. If that comes with criticism, the focus on what you have not done right, then learning becomes something associated with pressure rather than growth. So I think these are possible reasons why some of our children end up with, that state of unmotivated, be it in an assessment setting or in school or at home.
Your whatever you just shared reminds me of a student that I once taught. So he came to me in primary 2. And when he came, he was like, he refused to participate in class. So he was a non-reader. So which means that he couldn't read simple words like was, but, I saw, words that are very common for like P1, P2 children. So he came to us only in primary 2, which meant that he has been struggling for a year, right? Before he sought help. And I think by the time he came, he was quite defeated, like what you said. He refused to talk even. So you would ask him questions and then he would just look down. Yeah. So that was really his default mode of looking down, and it continued like for several weeks or months, I think. Yeah. And so you ask yourself, like, it's so painful to see a child like that. He's only like 8.
Start of the journey.
Exactly. So what has happened to make him like that? So I think that past year of being defeated, of feeling that defeat in school, has got into him. It also didn't help that he is English is not his first language. So he came from China a while back, but I think he still hasn't gotten fluent with the English language. So he was unable to relate to his friends because he felt embarrassed about conversing, and he couldn't relate to the teacher. And the worst of all is, in Singapore, we cannot run away from English. So he is just forced to just, deal with this language that's imposed upon him, and he doesn't have any control over what he cannot do.
So it's that lack of autonomy, right? When you talk about motivation, autonomy is one of the contributing factors that will drive motivation. Similarly with another factor that's also competence. So he's not feeling any form of achievement or in terms of where his level of English is at. Is it progressing? Because he's finding it hard to communicate. So even at that entry point, which is to be able to communicate confidently, he's not there yet.
Exactly.
So naturally, he'll not be motivated to participate, right? Because no confidence is achieved. Then at the same time, based on what you've shared, he doesn't connect with his peers, I'm assuming as well, right? So there's that factor of relatedness. Does he feel a sense of belonging in his environment? And that's probably why, you can imagine by the time he reaches DAS, his DAS class, he's just like, I'm done, right? What's the point? Like you mentioned, what's the point of trying? And so as a result, he's not going to be motivated, right?
Yes, for sure. I think especially for children with learning differences, I'm assuming that he came through to DAS, meaning that he has probably gotten a diagnosis or gotten some assessment done such that we are better able to understand his learning profile. So in addition to a language difficulty, he's probably having literacy difficulties, which June has mentioned. So similar to what Jolene has said, if you constantly get feedback that, no matter what you do, you are getting it wrong, you're not getting it right. And to the child, I'm really doing my best. You're telling me that even after doing my best, I'm still wrong.
And best is subjective, right?
And I think as adults, if you get that kind of feedback, you will feel quite demoralized. You'll feel quite not encouraged to try. Much less for children who are genuinely struggling with the actual fact of reading, connecting with others. So that perpetual disappointment that they face in terms of I can't do this, right? It definitely leads to a lack of motivation.
It is.
But I would also say that based on the students I've had over the years, right, it doesn't always look that way. I think we also want to say that it just because a learner has a learning need, it doesn't mean they come in automatically unmotivated, right? We don't want to discriminate
That's
or put that in that box, right?
Yeah.
Stereotype them as such. In fact, we do see a lot of our students coming in, and Jolene, you can add in here, right? Coming in very much motivated to learn, right? When these areas, whether they feel confident, whether they feel like they're able to relate to their peers, whether they feel like they have a choice, they are in fact very much motivated to learn, right? You might find them saying things like, you might give them a bonus question and you're like, oh, that's optional, you don't have to do that. And they're like, oh, I want to do it. And you're thinking like, are you sure? Like, I don't want to pressure them, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Or I recall there was this one class that I was teaching, it was secondary school. And I forgot what the reading comprehension passage was about, but typically, we have our pre-vocabulary or pre-reading comprehension activity. And it was a game on Kahoot, but the Kahoot was not the point of it, but we're talking about the revolution. I think it's the revolution, if I'm not mistaken. And this can be a very boring topic, okay? And so one of the comments that a very quiet learner mentioned in the class, she said, why don't we learn it this way in school? And I thought that was very interesting. I'm not saying that I'm the best teacher out there and this is the best way to teach the revolution. But I thought that, hey, this tells me that though it's a boring topic, a person or a student can still be very much motivated to learn, even though they're coming in with a learning difficulty. That doesn't tell you much, or that doesn't explain, right? That's not the cause of a lack of motivation, but they are able to learn. But as you said, right, the moment challenges come in or there's constant negative feedback, and we always have to remember, and this is something that I have to also be very mindful of, right? Any negative comment is something that they will internalize, right? And we don't want that for anybody, even as adults, right? Even for the adults. Yeah, so when those challenges start kicking in or they go through prolonged periods of constant difficulties, challenges, negative feedback, then yes, that motivation can take a hit. And the longer that is, then you'll start seeing the lack of motivation in other areas of their life too, right?
That's right.
In learners with ADHD, is this something that you is seen as well?
Yeah, so you're right in mentioning that motivation can appear quite inconsistent. I think for some of our children, especially when they are faced with a task that they assume it's a bit difficult, they may just say, I don't want to do it. But sometimes if you change the medium, the way you present the task, maybe for your topic of revolution, the way you taught it was interesting enough for them to feel that they have some confidence to make an attempt, then they are willing to try.
Yeah.
For children with ADHD, actually, it can appear quite the same. In some ways, they are quite inconsistent in the way they may be motivated to do something. Sometimes if the task is really interesting, they may be really motivated. But sometimes if the task is maybe a bit challenging, they already have an innate difficulty in maintaining the attention, sustaining that effort to focus. So if the task is presumably not as interesting, then you may find the inconsistent attention, motivation in completing the task. So it's also finding that medium or that task that interests them, that can bring their attention or make them feel confident enough to try. I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as educators.
Speaking of, the revolution, don't ask me what it was about. I don't remember. Okay, I studied it for that class. But how do you think the reason or the lack of motivation might appear in teenagers, right? I talked about revolution, you talked about ADHD and sustained attention and things like that. Do you think there are any other factors that we should bear in mind when trying to motivate teens?
Right. I think this group of young people are quite different. So at that age, maybe 10 years old onwards, they would be seeking after social validation from their peers, especially. And then parents become less important. I think they're very sensitive to, social evaluation. Yeah. So in everything that they do, I think this status and respect becomes a powerful drive for their motivation and behavior. Yeah. For teenagers, I think if something doesn't meet their need, which is the status and respect, then they wouldn't be very motivated to do whatever you want them to do. So for example, schoolwork, okay, for some of them, maybe grades, getting good grades makes my peers look at me, then fine. It works, right? For some kids, but for some it doesn't. So for the others, maybe social media is a way to get what they want, status and respect. They get it from social media because their friends liked their post. They get the validation from social media. And that's where they get voice and visibility as well.
Okay, so I think one key thing that we should always think about when we encounter either children or students, right, who are not so motivated, is to ask ourselves what are experiences that this child has gone through. Right, and to understand whether this child has been given opportunities to feel successful, whether, like some of you mentioned, right, they have been equipped with the right strategies to taste success, even small ones as well, and whether they feel safe to make mistakes. I think those are important factors to consider because it will give us some insights to maybe what we can modify about the environment and the experience with the child to give them hope, to see light, right, that they can give it another shot and to be successful in what we are trying to teach them.
So Dr. June talked about status and respect, right? So beyond that, earlier on, I briefly touched on competence, feeling confident, giving them choice, allowing them to feel like they belong in the environment. But on top of that, we also have status and respect. And then Jolene brought in that point about the environment, right? What are we doing to create this environment so that they feel motivated? Yeah. We sometimes, again, what we don't want to do is peg the lack of motivation, an attitude problem that the learner possesses, right? We have to do something where we can to allow that motivation to kick off that motivation, basically. What are some of the things that we can do in terms of the environment, though? I mean, whether it's from a parent perspective or an educator perspective.
I like the point that Jolene mentioned about, nurturing an environment such that the children are willing to try. That's really important, I think, for parents or educators working with the child, ensuring that the environment is safe and allowing the child to be able to ask for help. I think having the child feel safe enough to try, to make mistakes, those are important things that we want to nurture in the environment itself. So we usually encourage parents to focus on the effort that the child has put in rather than just the end result. Yeah. So imagine, for instance, perhaps a child has scored well in an exam or a test. So instead of focusing on the good grade, perhaps the parents can look at things like, what do you do to help you achieve this good grade? Do you do something different this time compared to the last time? So looking at the process, looking at the way the child had accomplished certain tasks to reach the outcome is more important than the outcome itself. Because then that helps the child think about, okay, I am in charge, I am in control of my own actions such that I can change my abilities and can grow to meet certain outcomes. I think that's something important that parents should inculcate in our children. Yes.
Yeah, I think, as you're saying that, I think we all know this, right? Don't focus on the output, on the outcome. You have to focus on the process. And in theory, it sounds very easy. Right? Yes. But even I find myself having to pause and think, okay, we see the answer and the first thing we want to say, oh, your answer is correct. And I just have to take a step back because obviously they showed the working, they did show the right working, or they did annotate accordingly based on the approach that you've taught them. And that's allowed them to arrive at the answer. And just intuitively, you want to say, well done, you got it right? And so I think it's very simple things like that we have to pay attention to. Just take that step back and say, oh, let me see whether you annotated. Your annotation was correct, right? Yeah. Oh, I see how this time round you were able to write the equation correctly, for example. Now I see how you arrived at your answer. So I think it's these small things. It's not some major shift that we're making. Right. Yeah. Sometimes, parents feel like, or educators, they feel like, well, my hands are tied. What can I do? I am busy juggling so and so and so, which we understand that's valid. Yeah. But it's also these small adjustments in just the way we communicate and not exactly moving things around to accommodate them. Yes, right? Yeah. Another thing in the environment here is also screens. Now, we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about screens. I know there is a lot of debate out there about, the use of screens in education, but we're not going to go there today, okay? But we have to also acknowledge that screens are a big part of the environment. Yeah. How should we navigate that then?
So actually in our practice, speaking with parents, a lot of parents mention that, oh, my child is distracted or too focused on the screens and they don't do anything at home. So while it is true, our children are more digitally connected nowadays as compared to the past. They are more likely to get access to screens in school. They have to complete their tasks online. It's important that parents set some boundaries, help their child build routines that allow them to regulate, their use of screens. So this can mean setting some rules, maybe working together with the child. It really depends on the age of the child as well. Whether it's something that can be negotiated, talked about at home, so that you can set some boundaries such that they know when you can get access to screens and when you can't. So with that, parents can also refer to some guidelines online. We have the guidelines from the Ministry of Health on how long a child should get access to screens on a daily basis. Typically, we advise parents of primary school age children not more than 2 hours a day. Of course, if they have to do some work online, then they will have to get access to the devices.
Okay, I'm going to go on a whim here and I'm going to invite Dr. June and Jolene to share because both of you are moms. Okay, but I also know that your parenting styles are different, which is fair, right? I'm not saying who's right, who's wrong. How do you guys navigate screen time with your children? And, I think both of you guys have like primary schoolers, but at the same time you have teens. So we have quite a great age range here. How do you navigate them, or how has that changed from teens to primary school? Yeah, whoever can go first.
Okay, start with preschool.
Yeah. Okay, keep it in the context of motivation because we don't want to make this any longer than it should. Yeah.
For my preschooler, I don't really expose him to screen time because I think it's at that age where I want him to enjoy play, different kinds of play. So the trick that I try to use is try to make other aspects of life interesting, exciting to look forward to. So that becomes the competitor to screen. Having fun out there is more fun than screen time. That's my trick.
The environment is bigger.
Yes,
right now,
bigger.
right?
But as my elder one grew and became more exposed to screens, I couldn't continue with just that, right? Because he gets the exposure from his peers, right? So what I do is try to set boundaries, like what Pearllyn mentioned, right? And I try not to peg that as a reward to what he does.
Okay.
Instead, I pegged it to time within a schedule. At what point in time you can use the screens for various activities.
Okay.
And also set some boundaries in terms of what you can use the screen for. I don't just give a device and say, you can use it to play anything on YouTube, right? I give a choice. Do you want to watch show A or show B? And I know both shows may provide some entertainment and some learning aspects as well. So that's how I try to structure it such that both options would work for me as a mother.
Right. And so the screens is not the focus of their day, or it's just a small part of their big day.
Make other parts more exciting to look forward to.
Dr. June, what about you?
Right. Okay. So Jolene has given the model answer for parents of preschoolers and primary schoolers.
We're not gonna do that. Okay. We're gonna keep it. Everyone has a different parenting style, and everyone does what works for them. Okay. Yes. Very important to say this.
Okay. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, I think not too different, but I'm still trying to be consistent. I think that not using screen as a reward or a bribe is so important.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think and one way to get around that is really to put it into your routine, like what Jolene mentioned. So like, maybe after revision time, you have this maybe half an hour of Netflix or whatever. So it's really just to put it within your routine so that it doesn't become a reward. And for teenagers, I think the escaping into screens is, I don't see it as like the cause of the lack of motivation. I see it as really byproduct of a lack of motivation.
Okay.
Because they are not motivated by something. So therefore, it is so much easier to just sit there and do, like brainless
Scrolling.
Doom
That's
scrolling.
right. Yes, doom scroll, right?
Doom scrolling. Yes.
So I think for teenagers, it's a bigger issue to fix if they are stuck to their screens.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so of course a very simple one that everyone would say would be set boundaries. But with teenagers, it's a little bit more tricky because they need their phone for
Correct.
Yes.
schoolwork.
And the status and respect also comes
yes,
from there,
status
right?
and
Like,
respect.
we have
They
to
need
acknowledge that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they need to know what's going on in the social world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you take it from them, then they lose that status and respect, and that would, I think, backfire on us.
Yeah.
It's tricky, but I think we will have to go to the source of the lack of motivation. Yeah, rather than just blame it like, okay, he's too captivated by the screens. But actually screens are just the victim. They are blameless. So yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We probably need to change our mindset on that. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's from the parent POV, right? What about educators? What can they do to support motivation in their students? And you know, when you talk about parents, that's coming from a point where, okay, how can I train them from young, right? And that's something that you can monitor every day. But when you talk about an educator, you could be a secondary school teacher, right? You know, that child comes to me with a lack of motivation already, right? I don't know what goes on at home, and everyone has a different profile. We have to acknowledge that as well. So what can educators keep in mind as they're thinking of how best to support motivation in their students?
I think as we think about motivation, it's not just the initial phase of being excited. Definitely, if we can make the lessons interesting, we can make the entire lesson or the entire subject interesting for the child, that would be ideal. But sometimes we have no control over what they learn. Okay, based on their experiences, based on their interests, every child is different. But I think I can build on what Hamada shared. I think 3 factors that are critical to motivation. Number 1 would be feeling competent, allowing the child to feel that I can do this with the right support, right? I can improve, right? The second thing that you mentioned was autonomy, giving them some autonomy. And the third thing is relatedness. So maybe I could share some examples for each. So to get our child more motivated through feeling competent, one way is to perhaps start with something more manageable for them instead of diving into a task that seems overwhelming, like writing an entire essay. Perhaps starting with something simpler, perhaps just generating ideas that you have for the essay. Right? And then reorganizing them. That's something more manageable for them. And it allows them to taste some success. Hopefully with that small success, it builds confidence. And they will then be able to pull through the task as you then increase the difficulty of the task. That's one way we can help them with motivation. It's also important, I think Pearllyn shared a little bit about this as well, giving them feedback, right? Specific, immediate feedback of how they can improve, not only in terms of the outcomes, have you done it right or wrong, but in terms of the strategies, what have you used correctly? What are some strategies that may be more effective than what you are currently using, right? So not putting down the strategies they are using, but offering other options for more effective, more efficient ways of solving a problem, for example. When they can see that there are concrete strategies they can try out with your guidance, definitely not immediately throwing them the strategies, then, getting that improvement, tasting that success then becomes within reach. The second factor is through autonomy. So it's not that we are asking them to have, full freedom, unlimited freedom, right? But it's really giving them some options. If it's a task like asking them to share their thoughts after reading something, would you like to share it through a mind map, or would you like to share it through a short paragraph? Offering that option, structured options that we can accept both of, I think it's also a way to get them feeling more involved in the task. That's how we give them a say. And the third thing is relatedness, the connection to others. All of us, even as adults, we want to feel respected, understood, safe in the environment that we are in. Same for kids as well. They want to feel safe in that learning environment. So if we, instead of just jumping into correction, perhaps acknowledging that they are dealing with a task that has some difficulty. So perhaps saying things like, okay, I know that this is difficult for you, but yes, I can see that you are pulling through, you're working on it longer today. Affirm them for it. It helps them feel understood, that you know that they are going through something difficult, but you're acknowledging that they're trying their best to pull through. I think when children feel understood, it's a higher chance that they will want to try again, to take our feedback, and to just take a little bit more learning risk. So I think I've shared quite a bit, but I think the key thing that I want to also share is that motivation is not something that we can demand from children. It's something that we would need to help them to grow gradually, right? Through the learning environments that we build.
So I think regardless of whatever point they come in, like in our classrooms, if we're talking from the POV of an educator, right? We work from there. We think about, okay, well, again, like framing it this way, right? Are they feeling competent? Are they feeling like they have a choice? Do they feel a sense of belonging? And I think from there, that gives us a good framework when we're thinking about what is causing the lack of motivation, but also in turn, well, then what can I do within these factors that can drive motivation?
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
What about at home though, Dr. June? You know, other than the screens, right? Separate from the screens, right? Yeah.
Okay, so I think earlier we talked about nagging, right?
Yeah.
We started with nagging.
Yeah.
So we must remember that nagging kills status and respect because when you nag at them, you are treating them like a child.
That's true.
Waiting to be controlled. Right? But they are teenagers who are craving that respect and validation from people. Right? So I think as a parent of teenagers, I try to reduce my nagging and I have a trick.
Okay.
Before you nag, you probably want to change it into a question rather than a command.
Okay.
So we try to consult rather than command. So instead of saying things like, how many times have I told you to do this?
Yes.
You might want to ask like, what are your plans for achieving this? Yeah, so if you change it into a question, then I think you are less likely to give that negativity. Yeah, and research has actually shown that, when mothers nag, you know what happens to the brains of teenagers?
What happens?
The planning part, which is your executive function part, shuts down.
Okay.
And the emotional part fires up. So nagging is counterproductive.
Okay.
So science has shown us that.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you think that you can achieve, what you want them to do just by nagging, science has shown us that it's not going to happen.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's for the nagging part. I think I also want to maybe expand on what Jolene had mentioned earlier about the choice. So last year, I was teaching my daughter subtraction. So we know that for subtraction, when you do your subtraction, a very natural thing for young kids to do is to count backwards, right? So 16 minus 8, you go 16, 15, 14 until you reach 8, right? But we know it is a slower way. And in school, they are taught how to do number bonds. Yeah. If you see a child counting like that backwards, right? You would naturally as a parent want to say, hey, no, that's too slow. Do it the number bonds way. But I think that if we become too prescriptive when we are helping them with their homework, we can end up with children who don't have control over their learning. And they are just, maybe some children will comply. The more compliant ones will comply. But you also have very strong-willed ones who say that, I don't want to do it your way. And if you insist, then you kill their interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I tell my daughter that, okay, you can do it the inchworm way. That's fine. And you will still get to the answer. But your teacher has shown you the grasshopper way. So when you're ready, you can use the grasshopper way. So I think by reframing it as that, you're giving them some control over their learning. And I think through that, they take ownership.
Yes.
For the process. Yeah. So it's really not just the grades that we are looking at. We value the process of learning.
Okay, so you shared what you typically do with your young, or rather, you gave an example of how you would help your younger one. But what about older ones, right? I think they're, you talk about the status and respect, they're a lot more sensitive as well. Just a simple one that I can recall. I had a learner with ADHD and dyslexia, and he used to have a lot of behavioral challenges when he was much younger. Okay, but when I got him, or rather when he moved over to my class, he was more toned down. Okay, he also went for therapy and all that. Okay, but anyway, the point is, one of the things that I said was something like, I think I used the word kid, but I meant that in a very casual way. I wasn't like dissing him or anything like that. Okay, so he said like, I'm not a child, something, and I thought that was interesting because it was in primary 6 in my heart. What do you mean? You are a child. Then he's like, I'm not a child. I'm like, in primary 6, I'm like I'm going to be a teenager. And now that we're talking about status and respect, that's essentially what he was trying to tell me. And some learners cannot say that to you, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a teen, or it could be like, she just like offended me, or she's like, or like, I don't like her.
Yeah.
She treats me like a child. But he was able to express that to me. And so from then on, I'm like, okay, you're not a child. Like, you're right. Okay.
Right.
You're just a student.
Yes.
You're just a student. Yeah. But it was so important to him. So the rapport that we had as teacher and student is that I cannot treat him like a child because that that identity of him being, I'm basically a teen, was very important to him, and that made him more willing to learn and remain motivated in class. Yeah, because of that relationship. Yeah.
Right. I think in the same way, I think we spoke about the sandwich feedback.
Oh yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That is so common. So usually when teachers, even when they write report books, right, you will get like, oh, okay, June is a helpful girl.
Yes.
But she needs to work harder on her English. And
Yes.
but overall, she's a good girl.
Yes.
Right. So I think for teenagers, because they are so sensitive, they might that you try to sandwich the criticism in between two good points. But for teenagers, it may not work.
Yeah.
They may just be waiting for, okay,
There's got to be a but.
What are you going to tell me?
Yeah.
What are you going to tell me that is bad about me? So they erase the good parts and they are just waiting for that criticism.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so in giving feedback to, I think, our young people, we might not want to use the traditional sandwich formula, which we are so comfortable with. We might want to try this feedback that actually gives them the respect and status that they crave for. So it's really, I think there was one study, they actually did a very simple feedback. It was like the teacher left feedback on their scripts, and it said that, like, I'm giving you this feedback because I have high expectations and I know you can reach it. So you would think that it's such a generic feedback, right? But in fact, the kids who actually received this feedback, they were more willing to change and modify their answers. And they handed up a essay that was so much better than what they did before. But for the other group, they didn't respond to that feedback because it was just, it didn't leverage on the status and respect that these youths are looking for.
I think the issue with that is when we have the sandwich method is also like a statement of how you are.
Yes.
Right. Versus the other one where we show the potential.
Right,
You are here now, but I know you can do better. And that's what I'm going to support you in. So it's that part about, I can be even better. It's not just you telling me what I am. It's something I have to accept about myself.
So I think giving them that potential, is so important.
I think that's something that both parents and educators can do, right? I mean, as teachers, again, when we talk about this environment thing, again, it's not some big shift. These are things that in our interactions with them, whether it's a comment or a feedback in the report book or even guiding them at home, that's something that we can take with us. How are we phrasing our feedback to them such that it's not some sandwich approach and they're just waiting for a but, right? But we are highlighting their potential.
I think that reminds us of the growth mindset, right? The growth mindset, you are not there yet.
Yes.
But you'll get there.
Yeah. But also, I can see that you are going to get there, right? Not just like, try better, try harder. Almost there. It's so long, right?
And that you're with them in the journey as well.
Yeah. How would parents guide their learners at home though? I think one of the, I actually had a participant recently come up to me and say, how do I help my learner at home, right? We're not talking about helping them with content type questions, but how do I just help build that motivation in terms of just getting them to, whether it's a routine, whether it's to sit down to do your work without the, just compliance, like how could...
I think there are a few ways to get your child or your student to do something. Sometimes it depends on perhaps one question, is it a skill issue or not? Does the child know what they're supposed to do? Sometimes to us as adults, a simple command like, go pack your bag. It's quite simple to us, you know, we just put your things in your bag. But for a child who doesn't know, what does pack my school bag mean? Do I put in all the textbooks that I have, all the notebooks that I have, all the files that I have? Or what about my notebook? What about my school diary, my water bottle, my pencil case, my wallet? So to a child who is unsure of the task, they may not be deliberately not doing the task that you want them to do. They may just not know how to do it. So it's important for the parent to also understand that, well, perhaps I may have to walk through the task with my child. To get my child started on something, I may have to break it down for them. I may have to guide them in doing the task step by step before I release a bit of that, allow them to do it themselves. Sometimes also just having a visual reminder, a visual cue can help the child to follow through with the task. All these may not be, it may not sound like something new or something, something that the parents may find different from what they're doing, but putting in place all these strategies quite consistently will be very helpful for the child.
Right. You know, I think earlier on we mentioned about a growth mindset as well. So the growth mindset is great, you know, for helping the kids continue trying and you know to put in the effort. But I think at the same time, something that's closely related to the growth mindset is also the mindset that stress can be enabling. Yeah, so for growth mindset, it's the challenge you can grow from the challenge, right? For the stress can be enabling mindset, it's that the stress can be helpful for you.
Yeah.
So I think many times we think that stress kills motivation. And you will hear like teenagers telling us that, you know, exam anxiety, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right? So then they blame it on the anxiety. But I think one maybe useful way that we can actually do it is to help them reframe that you know, when you get stressed and your heart beats faster, it means that more blood is pumped to your system. It means that you have more power, you have more oxygen that is delivered to your muscles and your brain to fight the challenge with you, not against you. Yeah, so I think, you know, just simply telling them that like it's really your body's way of fighting with you, not against you, can be quite powerful and empowering. Yeah.
Talking about, you know, like preparing for exams and getting to routines, things like that, something that I know a lot of parents and both educators do is using rewards. We're going to talk about this rewards now, right? And I think it's an important thing to talk about because it is, I can say, it is one of the go-to strategies for an educator and for parents as well, right? Just the reward changes. But my question is, how effective is this? Is this really something that we should continue to do? Is it, you know, is there a reason why it's a go-to? Is that why it's a go-to?
I think Jolene mentioned earlier a little bit about why we may need to start with a reward, because if the child is finding the task a bit difficult or like the situation I mentioned right at the start, right? The child is just not willing to do something that they find maybe a bit challenging. So using the reward might be something you may want to start with. But that reward should not be the only reason why the child is doing something. Because then over time, they are just working for the reward. And if the reward is not there, then why am I doing this task? So building up that intrinsic kind of motivation is important. But when do you actually fade out the reward really depends on the situation. So building up competency, I think we have mentioned quite a few points, would really help the child to develop that initial intrinsic kind of motivation, willingness to try the task, and eventually perhaps pairing the rewards with something verbal, maybe a praise, or maybe an explicit mention of the strategies that they should be doing or have done, have tried and worked, would help to reinforce that mindset of like, okay, I can change, I can improve, and they may not need a reward to motivate them. So that's the end goal, I suppose, in terms of when are we using the reward and at what point do we stop it?
Okay, we are reaching the end. So, you know, we've wrapped up, or rather, you know, you summed it up quite well in terms of that reward, right? And we're really looking at, okay, well, reward is just a small part in this whole big thing called motivation. And while it is useful, especially for learners at the beginning when they're having difficulties, you know, whether it's task completion or feeling that needing that push, extrinsic motivators can come in handy and it will be a very useful system. But that shouldn't be the system, right? Ultimately, we're going to want to wean them off. And slowly, again, I like that part when you say we're going to tag it to a praise or the process to build on that intrinsic motivation. So I think the bigger picture, you know, we're going to zoom out a little bit, right? Why is motivation so important? Right. I think that is the bigger question, you know, whether it's extrinsic or why is it that we can't or we shouldn't be just relying on external motivators, and we want to eventually, ideally, have learners or help them in developing intrinsic motivation. Why is that so important?
I think we know that like motivated children are more likely to want to try. And when faced with setbacks, they are less likely to give up and they would persevere.
Yes.
So I think motivation would result in a more resilient individual. And I think motivation in school is really just the start, right, of the journey. And you have life to face in future. So I think if you can actually build the value, this kind of quality when they're young, that, you know, I'm working not just for the reward, but for just to enjoy the whole process of it, life would be so much more fulfilling and richer. Yeah. I mean, that's what I feel.
Yeah, I agree that if they're intrinsically motivated, they get to enjoy learning more. And you learn every day when you're in school, right?
Yeah.
So it builds that mindset also. And it helps them pull through challenges. No matter what they learn, they will encounter difficulties here and there in different degrees as well. But if they are not intrinsically motivated, it's very hard to pull through those difficulties.
Pearllyn, anything to add?
I think just one last thing about how the child or the individual may not always have an external kind of motivator there to push them along.
Right.
So
Yeah.
developing the internal intrinsic motivation is especially important.
Right.
I agree. And that's when you'll have learners feeling, or individuals, right? And when they grow up, they feel like, you know, what is the point of all this? You start you start questioning, right? What is the point of all this? Because perhaps there was a period where you were very much dependent on all these external motivators, and then you start thinking, okay, when
it's gone, right?
When it's gone, like,
that's
what's my
right.
purpose then? Like, what do I find enjoyable then, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for your inputs. I hope that has been an insightful conversation as we took you through the topic of motivation, and hopefully there'll be something for you to take away and apply, whether to your child at home or your student in the classroom. Until next time, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.